A retired Navy SEAL kept an old leather dog collar hanging by his kitchen window for 6 long years. It belonged to Rex, the German shepherd he was told had died overseas. Then, on a bright Montana morning, Jack stopped at a struggling rescue shelter and heard frantic barking inside a transport truck. One wounded dog broke free from a crate, thin, scarred, and carrying a name that was never his. A quiet winter had settled over Silver Creek, Montana, covering the lakeshore town in fresh snow and soft silence. The frozen lake stretched beneath pale skies, while pine trees stood motionless beneath layers of white frost. To most people, it looked peaceful. To Jack Turner, peace had always been something that existed outside him. At 54 years old, Jack lived alone in a weathered cabin overlooking the lake. He was a retired Navy SEAL, tall and broad-shouldered, with graying blonde hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and deep blue eyes that seemed older than the rest of him. Time had left scars on his body, but the deeper scars remained hidden inside. 6 years earlier, during a mission in Afghanistan, an explosion had torn through a mountain road patrol. Jack survived. His military working dog did not. At least that was what the official reports said. The German shepherd's name had been Rex. Every document listed him as lost in action and presumed dead. Jack had signed the paperwork himself, yet every time he looked at the old leather collar hanging beside his kitchen window, some stubborn part of him refused to believe it. People often said grief faded with time. Jack knew better. Grief did not fade. It simply learned how to sit quietly in the corner. He poured black coffee into a metal mug and stared out across the frozen lake. The collar swayed slightly beside the window. Rex's brass nameplate still reflected light whenever the sun touched it. Some mornings Jack caught himself talking to it. He always stopped when he realized what he was doing. That day was no different. A few minutes later he loaded bags of dog food into his aging pickup truck. The supplies were headed to Silver Creek Animal Rescue, a small shelter located on the northern edge of town. Jack volunteered there several times each month. He never admitted why. Everyone assumed he simply liked helping animals. The truth was more complicated. Every dog he helped reminded him of the one he could not save. The shelter belonged to Emily Carter. At 62 years old, Emily was one of those women who seemed impossible to defeat. She was of average height, with silver hair tied into a practical ponytail and sharp green eyes that noticed everything. Years of rescuing abandoned animals had given her endless patience for creatures, and almost none for foolish people. 8 years earlier, cancer had taken her husband Robert after a long and painful battle. Watching him suffer had changed her forever. Instead of retreating from the world, she devoted herself even more fiercely to saving unwanted animals. Many people in Silver Creek believed Emily cared more about dogs and cats than she did about herself. They were probably right. Unfortunately, caring did not pay bills. The shelter was struggling. Veterinary expenses had risen, donations had fallen. The property taxes alone were becoming difficult to manage. Emily stood outside the main building when Jack arrived. Snowflakes drifted around her red winter coat as she folded her arms against the cold. "You're late," she called. "5 minutes," Jack replied. "That's practically early." Emily smiled. "Keep telling yourself that." Jack unloaded the food while several dogs barked excitedly from nearby kennels. One of them was Cooper, a 7-year-old Labrador mix with one floppy ear and endless enthusiasm. Cooper had been abandoned by a family that moved away. Despite everything, he greeted every human as if they were his best friend returning from a long trip. Jack admired that kind of optimism, because he could never understand it. Emily followed him into the storage room. Her smile disappeared once the door closed. "The bank called again," she said quietly. Jack sighed. He had expected this conversation eventually. "How bad?" "Worse than last month." Jack leaned against a shelf. Emily rarely admitted fear. The fact that she looked worried now told him more than her words. "We'll figure something out," he said. Emily laughed softly. "That's exactly what Robert used to say." For a moment, neither spoke. Memories hung between them. Then, Emily's phone vibrated. The screen displayed a name she clearly recognized. Sarah. Emily rolled her eyes before answering. Sarah Carter lived in Denver and worked as a corporate attorney. At 36, she had built a successful career representing large companies. She was intelligent, ambitious, and relentlessly practical. Years earlier she had watched cancer slowly destroy her father. That experience left scars of its own. Since then, Sarah had become obsessed with protecting the people she loved from future pain. In her mind, the shelter represented risk, financial stress, physical exhaustion, endless responsibility. She wanted her mother to sell the property, retire comfortably, and enjoy whatever years remained. Emily viewed the idea as surrender. Their conversations rarely ended well. Jack could hear only one side of the discussion. "No, Sarah." Pause. "Because I don't want to." Another pause. "The animals need somewhere to go." Longer pause. "I'm not selling." Emily ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Her expression hardened. "Still trying?" Jack asked. "Every week. She worries about you." Emily stared toward the kennels. "I know." Her voice softened. "That's what makes it harder." Jack understood. Love often looked different depending on where someone stood. Before either could continue, a strange sound drifted across the property. Barking. Not normal barking. Not excitement. Panic. Both turned toward the entrance road. A large white transport van was approaching the gate. Rust covered parts of its lower panels. The vehicle looked older than it should have. More dogs slammed against metal walls. The noise sent an uneasy feeling through Jack's chest. Military instincts never disappeared completely. Sometimes danger announced itself before reason could explain why. Emily frowned. "We aren't expecting a transport today." The van stopped near the entrance. Two men climbed out. One was heavy-set with a red face and a black winter jacket stretched tightly across his stomach. The other was thin and nervous, carrying a clipboard. Neither looked comfortable. Another violent crash echoed from inside the van. The barking intensified. Dogs were throwing themselves against cages. Jack took a step forward. The heavy-set driver raised a hand. "Everything's under control," he said quickly. Nobody believed him. A second crash followed. Metal screeched. Something broke. Then everything happened at once. One of the rear cage doors burst open. A German shepherd exploded out of the transport compartment and landed hard in the snow. The dog was painfully thin. Ribs showed beneath a filthy black and tan coat. Old scars crossed its shoulders and neck. One ear carried a torn tip. It stumbled slightly when its left hind leg touched the ground. Then it spun around, searching wildly for an escape route. The entire world seemed to slow. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. The limp, the posture, the way the dog tilted its head. Impossible. His mind rejected the idea immediately. 6 years. 6 years of silence. 6 years of paperwork and grief and unanswered questions. Yet he could not look away. The dog turned toward him. Their eyes met. Something deep inside, Jack cracked open. Before logic could stop him. Before reason could remind him how impossible this was. A single word escaped his lips. The German shepherd froze. Completely froze. The barking vanished from Jack's ears. The wind disappeared. Even the falling snow seemed to stop. The dog stared directly at him. And for the first time in 6 years, Jack felt hope return. The snow continued falling over Silver Creek, covering the shelter yard in a fresh layer of white, as silence hung over everyone gathered near the transport van. For a moment, nobody moved. Jack Turner stood frozen in place, his blue eyes locked on the German shepherd standing several yards away. The dog looked older, thinner, and far more damaged than the powerful military partner Jack remembered. Deep scars crossed the animal's shoulders. One ear had a torn edge. His black and tan coat had lost much of its shine, and his ribs showed beneath his fur. Yet something remained unchanged. The dog tilted his head slightly to the left, exactly the way Rex had done hundreds of times during training missions overseas. Jack felt his chest tighten painfully. His mind searched desperately for another explanation. 6 years was a long time. Too long. Yet the limp in the left hind leg matched an injury Rex had suffered during a patrol near Kandahar. The crescent-shaped scar above the joint matched too. The dog stared at him. Then everything happened at once. The German shepherd let out a low whine unlike anything the shelter workers had heard before. It was not the sound of fear, it was recognition. The dog lunged forward through the snow. Emily Carter gasped. One of the transport drivers instinctively stepped backward. Jack barely had time to react before the shepherd reached him. The dog crashed against his chest with enough force to nearly knock him down. Then he pressed himself against Jack, trembling violently. Jack dropped to one knee. His hands moved almost automatically through the animal's fur. Every memory he had spent 6 years trying to bury came flooding back. Desert heat, radio chatter, long patrols, nights beneath foreign stars. The sound of Rex breathing beside him. "Rex," Jack whispered again. The dog's tail wagged once. Then again, tears burned behind Jack's eyes. Around them, the shelter seemed to disappear. Emily watched in stunned silence. During all the years she had known Jack, she had never seen him cry. Not when talking about war. Not when speaking about loss. Not even at Robert Carter's funeral years earlier. Yet now tears rolled freely down his face. The heavyset transport driver cleared his throat awkwardly. His name was Bill Hansen, a man in his late 50s who had spent decades hauling livestock and rescue animals across western states. Bill wasn't cruel by nature, but years of difficult work had made him detached. Animals often became paperwork instead of lives. For the first time that morning, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. "His name's Shadow," Bill said quietly. The dog immediately ignored him and pushed closer to Jack. Emily turned sharply. "Are you sure?" Jack never looked away from the shepherd. "I'm sure." The second transport worker stepped forward. His name was Kevin Moore, a nervous young man barely 25 years old. Kevin had started working for the transport company 6 months earlier after losing his previous job during company layoffs. He constantly worried about making mistakes because he couldn't afford another setback. He checked his clipboard. "Record say Shadow? Estimated age 7? Emily frowned. "Estimated." Kevin nodded nervously. "That's what the paperwork says." Jack finally looked at the documents. "Rex is 10, Kevin blinked. "What?" Emily took the clipboard from him. Years of managing the shelter had taught her how to spot problems quickly. As she flipped through the forms, her expression darkened. "This doesn't make sense." Several shelter volunteers had gathered nearby. Among them was Lisa Hernandez, a retired elementary school teacher who volunteered 3 days each week. Lisa was known for remembering every animal's name and every human's birthday. She stepped closer. "What's wrong?" Emily pointed at one page. "This dog is listed as 7 years old. His vaccination record says 9. She turned another page. "And this microchip number is incomplete." Jack continued examining Rex. The dog refused to leave his side. Every few seconds he would look up at him as if confirming he was truly there. The behavior felt painfully familiar. During deployments, Rex had always checked Jack's position before settling down. It had become a habit between them. Emily continued reading. The more she looked, the worse it became. One dog listed inside the van supposedly belonged to a rescue group in Idaho. Another form claimed the same dog originated in Oregon. A third document used a completely different name. "You've got to be kidding me," Emily muttered. She flipped through additional records. Several vaccination certificates carried identical signatures, despite being issued in different states. Dates didn't match. Ages changed from page to page. Some dogs appeared to have been renamed multiple times. Lisa leaned closer. Could these just be clerical mistakes? Emily shook her head. Not this many. Jack finally stood. Rex immediately rose with him. The dog's eyes never left his face. Emily watched the interaction carefully. No training command had been given, no leash connected them, yet the shepherd moved exactly as a working dog partnered with its handler. Bill scratched the back of his neck. Look, maybe somebody mixed up some forms. Emily closed the folder. Somebody mixed up a lot more than forms. At that moment a loud crash echoed from inside the van. Every head turned. Another dog had slammed into a crate wall. The sound was followed by frantic barking. Rex reacted instantly. His body stiffened. The joyful reunion vanished from his expression. He spun toward the transport vehicle. His ears rose, his tail lowered. The change surprised Jack. "What is it?" he asked softly. Rex stared at the van. Then he took several steps toward it. Jack followed. The shepherd stopped near the barking continued. Several frightened dogs were still trapped in metal crates. One was an elderly golden retriever with cloudy eyes and graying fur around the muzzle. The old dog appeared at least 12 years old. A faded tag identified her as Daisy. She pressed herself against the corner of her crate and trembled. Nearby, a young border collie named Scout pawed frantically at the cage door. Scout's paperwork claimed he was 3 years old, but Emily already suspected much of the paperwork was unreliable. Rex let out a low whine. Then he looked back at Jack. The expression in his eyes felt strangely familiar. It reminded Jack of patrols overseas when Rex would detect danger and try to communicate something beyond words. The shepherd stepped closer to the van. Then he looked back again. Emily noticed it too. "He's trying to show us something." Jack nodded slowly. Something else was happening. Something Rex considered more important than himself. Bill shifted uncomfortably. The dogs just need unloading. But even he sounded unconvinced. Rex ignored everyone. He stood at the van entrance, staring into the darkness between the stacked crates. Then he looked back at Jack one more time. His message seemed unmistakable. "Don't look at me, look at them." The snowfall had slowed by the time Jack Turner climbed into the back of the transport van. The reunion with Rex still felt unreal, like a dream that might disappear if he blinked too long. Yet the smell inside the vehicle quickly pulled him back to reality. Damp fur, fear, sickness, and neglect filled the narrow cargo space. Metal crates lined both sides of the van from floor to ceiling. Some dogs barked frantically. Others remained silent, curled into themselves as if they had learned long ago that nobody came when they cried. Emily Carter stepped inside behind him and immediately covered her mouth. Even after decades of rescuing abandoned animals, the sight shocked her. More than a dozen dogs occupied the cramped crates. Several were visibly underweight. Water bowls sat empty. Blankets were soaked and dirty. One crate contained a young border collie whose paperwork identified him as Scout. The dog appeared barely 2 years old, with black and white fur and bright, intelligent eyes that had not yet lost hope. He pressed against the crate door the moment Emily approached. Nearby sat a boxer mix named Rosie, a middle-aged female whose ribs showed beneath her short brown coat. She wagged her tail despite her condition, desperate for attention. Jack moved slowly through the narrow aisle, while Rex stayed close behind him. The German shepherd ignored every opportunity to leave the van. Instead, he carefully examined each crate, stopping to sniff the bars before moving on. His behavior reminded Jack of military searches overseas. Rex was not wandering. He was checking, looking, counting. Then the shepherd stopped. At the very back corner of the van sat a large crate covered by an old blanket. A low whine escaped Rex's throat. Jack pulled the blanket aside. Inside lay an elderly golden retriever. Her fur, once golden, had faded to pale cream. Age had whitened her muzzle. One of her front legs was swollen. Fresh scratches marked her side. The dog barely lifted her head. "Easy, girl," Jack whispered. A faded tag attached to the crate read Molly. Emily crouched beside the cage. She's hurt. Molly looked at them with tired brown eyes. There was no fear in her expression anymore. Only exhaustion. Jack had seen that look before in wounded soldiers. People who had suffered so long they no longer expected help. Rex lowered himself beside the crate. The moment Molly noticed him, her tail moved weakly against the floor. Emily frowned. They know each other. Rex gently touched his nose to the metal bars. Molly responded with another faint wag. Something about the interaction made Jack uneasy. This wasn't the greeting of strangers. It looked more like old companions reunited after hardship. Outside, volunteers began unloading the healthier dogs. Emily turned toward Bill Hansen. "How long has Molly been in transport?" Bill shifted nervously. "I don't know exactly." "You don't know," Emily's voice sharpened. "The paperwork says 4 days. Bill avoided her eyes. "That's what they gave me." Emily took the documents again. The deeper she looked, the worse the inconsistencies became. Molly's age appeared as 8 years on one page and 13 on another. A vaccination date listed in Colorado somehow matched a veterinarian clinic located in Nevada. Several signatures appeared copied. Emily felt anger building inside her. Mistakes happened. This wasn't mistakes. This was negligence. Meanwhile, several miles away, a dark blue SUV rolled into Silver Creek. Sarah Carter sat behind the wheel. At 36 years old, Sarah carried herself with the confidence of a successful attorney. Her dark hair was tied neatly behind her head. Sharp features and intelligent brown eyes gave her a serious appearance that intimidated many people in courtrooms. She had spent years building a career in Denver, negotiating contracts and solving problems with logic instead of emotion. Yet beneath her professional exterior remained the frightened daughter who had watched cancer slowly take her father. That experience had changed everything. Since then, Sarah viewed risk differently. Every threat looked larger. Every uncertainty felt dangerous, which was exactly why she wanted her mother to sell the shelter. Her phone conversation with Emily the previous day had ended badly. Guilt lingered in her chest as she parked near the rescue center. She loved her mother deeply. They simply disagreed about almost everything. Back at the van, Emily continued sorting documents while Jack carefully opened Molly's crate. The golden retriever struggled to stand. Rex immediately moved beside her, allowing the older dog to lean against him for support. The sight stunned everyone watching. Molly took a few shaky steps before stopping. Rex never left her side. "Look at that," whispered Lisa Hernandez, the retired teacher volunteer. "He's helping her walk." Jack watched silently. Something was happening that none of them understood yet. Sarah approached from across the snowy yard and stopped when she saw the scene. "What's going on?" Emily looked up. Perfect timing. Sarah glanced between the dogs, the transport workers, and the scattered paperwork. "Mom?" Emily handed her several forms. "Read these?" Sarah scanned the documents quickly. Years of legal work had trained her to spot inconsistencies. Within minutes she noticed the same problems Emily had found, yet her conclusion differed. "This looks sloppy," Sarah said. "Very sloppy, but not criminal." Emily folded her arms. "You don't think it's suspicious?" "I think people make mistakes." Jack looked toward the van. "This many mistakes?" Sarah hesitated. "Companies lose records. Employees enter wrong information." Emily sighed. This was exactly why conversations with her daughter became exhausting. Sarah always searched for reasonable explanations first. Emily had spent 20 years rescuing animals from people who depended on reasonable explanations. Their disagreement ended when another volunteer emerged from the van carrying a small mixed-breed dog. The dog was tiny, perhaps 3 years old, with wiry gray fur and one cloudy eye. A tag identified him as Benny. Despite his size, Benny barked fiercely at everyone around him. "Fear," Emily said softly. "Not aggression." Sarah watched the little dog tremble. Something about him reminded her of herself after her father's death. Small, scared, trying to appear stronger than she felt. One by one, the dogs were removed from the transport vehicle. Yet Rex remained focused on the van, even after Molly was safely outside, even after Scout, Rosie, Benny, and the others had been unloaded. He refused to leave. Jack called him twice. The German shepherd ignored him. Instead, Rex walked directly to the open rear doors and lay across the entrance. His body blocked the path completely. He stared into the darkness inside, waiting, watching. Jack approached slowly. "Rex?" The shepherd glanced back briefly before returning his attention to the interior. Emily stepped closer. "He's not done." "Done with what?" Sarah asked. Nobody answered. Because none of them knew. All they knew was that Rex, after 6 years lost to the world, seemed far less interested in his own rescue than in the animals still trapped around him. Only when the final crate was carried out and every dog stood safely on the shelter grounds did Rex finally relax. Yet even then he remained lying across the doorway, guarding the empty van as though making absolutely certain nobody would be left behind again. A gray winter sky hung over Silver Creek as fresh snow drifted lazily across the rescue center. The excitement surrounding Rex's return had faded into something quieter and far more unsettling. Questions had replaced celebration. Every answer seemed to create 2 new mysteries. Inside the small medical building behind the shelter, Dr. Amanda Brooks moved carefully from kennel to kennel, while recording notes on a digital tablet. Amanda was 41 years old, a veterinarian known throughout 3 counties for her patience and honesty. She had grown up on a cattle ranch outside Bozeman and had spent most of her adult life helping injured animals. Years earlier she had lost her younger brother in a highway accident caused by a drunk driver. The tragedy had made her deeply protective of vulnerable creatures, because she understood how quickly life could change. Amanda rarely jumped to conclusions. That was why Emily trusted her judgment more than anyone else's. The examination room was filled with nervous energy. Scout the border collie paced circles inside a temporary kennel. Rosie the boxer mix slept heavily beneath a blanket after receiving food and fluids. Benny, the small gray mixed-breed dog, growled at anyone who approached too quickly but accepted treats from Amanda without protest. Molly remained the most concerning case. The elderly golden retriever lay on a padded bed while Amanda gently examined her swollen leg. Rex refused to leave Molly's side. Whenever Amanda moved too close, he watched carefully, though never aggressively. Jack sat nearby and observed everything in silence. The last 2 days had felt unreal. Every time he looked at Rex, part of him still expected the dog to disappear. Amanda finished examining Molly and turned toward Emily. "The injury is old," she said quietly. "Several weeks at least. It healed badly because nobody treated it." Emily frowned. "Could she have been transported like this the entire time?" Amanda nodded. "Possibly longer." Jack clenched his jaw. The answer angered him more than he expected. Military working dogs were treated better than many people during deployments. Seeing these animals neglected stirred something dark inside him. Amanda continued moving through the examinations. One by one, a disturbing pattern emerged. Many of the dogs carried scars from old restraints. Several showed signs of prolonged confinement. Their nails were overgrown. Their muscles had weakened from lack of movement. More troubling was how they reacted to certain sounds. Whenever a metal latch snapped shut, multiple dogs flinched simultaneously. Scout flattened himself against the floor. Benny began trembling. Even Molly lifted her head nervously. Amanda looked toward Emily. "These dogs didn't come from different places." Emily blinked. "What do you mean?" "Their behavior is too similar." Amanda pointed toward Scout. "Fear responses can vary. But she gestured toward the kennels. "This looks like animals exposed to the same environment for a long time." Jack exchanged a glance with Emily. Neither liked where the conversation was heading. Meanwhile, Sarah Carter had transformed the shelter office into a temporary investigation room. Legal folders covered the desk. Her laptop displayed dozens of open browser tabs. At first, she had dismissed Emily's suspicions as emotional overreaction. Now she wasn't so sure. The transport company's paperwork continued revealing inconsistencies. Every document she checked seemed connected to another company. Every company led to another address. Several business registrations listed different names but shared identical mailing locations. Sarah leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. Corporate ownership structures were not unusual. What bothered her was how carefully these entities seemed designed to hide relationships. A knock interrupted her concentration. Lisa Hernandez entered carrying coffee. "You look like you haven't slept." Sarah accepted the cup. "I haven't," Lisa smiled. "Now, you sound like your mother." Sarah laughed despite herself. It was the first genuine laugh she had managed since arriving. After Lisa left, Sarah returned to her research. An hour later she found something that made her sit upright. 4 separate transportation companies were registered under different names, yet all of them eventually connected to a single holding company located in Wyoming. That company led to another, then another. Eventually the trail stopped at a private business trust. Someone had spent considerable effort hiding ownership. Sarah printed several pages and carried them outside. She found Jack near the kennels with Rex. The German Shepherd was resting beside Molly, though his eyes remained alert. "You need to see this," Sarah said. Jack followed her into the office. Emily joined them moments later. Sarah spread the documents across the desk. "These transport companies aren't independent." Emily studied the papers. "Same owner?" "Not directly." Sarah pointed at a chart. "But they're connected." Jack frowned. "Why would anyone do that?" Sarah hesitated. "Tax reasons, liability protection, sometimes legitimate business expansion." Emily crossed her arms. "And sometimes?" Sarah looked at the paperwork again. "Sometimes people don't want outsiders seeing the full picture." The room fell silent. Before anyone could speak further, Amanda entered carrying a small scanner. "I found something." She looked directly at Jack. "It's about Rex." Jack's heart immediately began racing. "His microchip still works." Emily leaned forward. "Can we track it?" Amanda nodded slowly, partially. She connected the scanner to her laptop and opened several databases. Information began appearing on the screen. Jack stepped closer. The first records were familiar. Military registration, deployment history, official designation. Then came the final entry from 6 years earlier. Status lost during operation. Presumed deceased. Jack had seen those words before. He hated them now as much as he had then. Amanda continued searching. Suddenly another entry appeared. Her expression changed immediately. "That's strange." Sarah moved beside her. "What?" Amanda pointed at the screen. A new registration had been added nearly 18 months after Rex disappeared. Different owner, different state, different identification number attached to the same microchip. Jack stared at the monitor. "That's impossible." Amanda kept scrolling. Additional entries appeared: Colorado, Nevada, Idaho, Oregon. Every few months the registration changed again. Sometimes the dog's name changed as well. Shadow, Ranger Duke. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Somebody kept moving him. Amanda nodded. For years. Jack sat down heavily. 6 years of unanswered questions suddenly became even larger. Rex hadn't died. Someone had possession of him. Someone had renamed him repeatedly and transported him across multiple states. The realization felt almost harder than believing he had died. Sarah studied the records carefully. Whoever controlled him wanted the trail buried. Amanda clicked another file. A location appeared again and again: Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho. Different registrations, different transport companies. Yet one destination repeated more than any other. Emily noticed it first. "What is that?" Sarah leaned forward. Her eyes narrowed. The same name appeared across multiple databases: transportation logs, veterinary transfers, and ownership changes. Amanda slowly read it aloud. "Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch." The room became completely silent. Nobody recognized the name, yet somehow it appeared everywhere. On Rex's records, on transportation routes, on transfer documents, like a shadow hidden behind years of missing information. Outside, Rex suddenly lifted his head from beside Molly and stared toward the office window, as if he had heard something none of them could hear. Inside, the mystery that had begun with a stolen name finally had a new lead. Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch. A sharp winter wind swept across the snow, covered hills beyond Silver Creek as Jack Turner drove north along a narrow county road with Rex sitting beside him in the truck. The landscape looked peaceful, but Jack's thoughts were anything but. For nearly a week, the name Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch had followed him everywhere. It appeared in veterinary transfers, transport records, ownership changes, and fragments of paperwork that should never have connected. The deeper he looked, the more often the same name emerged. Rex rested quietly against the passenger door. Yet every now and then the German Shepherd lifted his head and stared through the windshield as if he already knew where they were going. Beside Jack sat Sheriff Mike Reynolds, a broad-shouldered man approaching 60 whose calm personality had earned the trust of nearly everyone in the county. Years earlier, Mike had lost a deputy during a dangerous winter rescue operation, an event that taught him to distrust assumptions and rely on evidence. He rarely rushed into conclusions. That was one reason Jack respected him. When the ranch finally appeared beyond a row of snow-covered cottonwood trees, neither man spoke. The property looked impressive. Large fenced fields stretched across several acres. Modern kennel buildings stood neatly arranged around a central training area. Volunteers walked dogs through obstacle courses while several trainers worked with rescue animals near a barn. A large wooden sign near the entrance proudly displayed the ranch's name. If someone showed Jack a photograph of the place without context, he would have called it one of the finest rescue facilities in Montana. Yet something about perfection made him uneasy. They parked near the main office and were greeted by Karen Lewis, the ranch manager. Karen was a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and practical clothes, someone who genuinely seemed to care about animals. After leaving a stressful corporate career years earlier, she had dedicated herself to rescue work and appeared proud of everything the ranch represented. She welcomed them warmly and offered a tour without hesitation. As they walked through the property, everything appeared exactly as the public reports described. Kennels were clean. Dogs looked healthy. Volunteers seemed dedicated. Training records appeared organized. Yet whenever Jack glanced at Rex, the dog looked increasingly uncomfortable. His ears flattened whenever they approached one particular building near the back of the property. Unlike the other structures, this one had no windows visible from the front. It was older, built before the rest of the facility. Karen casually described it as a storage building used for supplies and maintenance equipment. Rex stopped walking entirely when they reached it. The dog stared at the building with an intensity Jack had not seen since military deployments. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Karen seemed surprised. "That's unusual," she said. "Most dogs never react to that building." Jack knelt beside Rex. The German Shepherd's muscles were tense beneath his recovering frame. Whatever memories lived inside him, something connected to that place had awakened them. Mike quietly noted the reaction, but said nothing. As the tour continued, Karen proudly explained the ranch's mission of rehabilitating working dogs and finding them new homes or careers. The story sounded noble. Unfortunately, it did not explain why so many records disappeared after animals arrived there. Later, while Karen fetched additional paperwork, Mike reviewed several public files stored in the office. Everything appeared legal. Everything appeared compliant. Yet multiple transfer logs ended abruptly. Dogs arrived. Dogs were evaluated. Dogs were reassigned. After that, nothing. No adoption records, no final placements, no follow-up reports. It was as if dozens of animals simply vanished into paperwork. Back in Silver Creek, Emily Carter stood in the shelter yard watching volunteers prepare for a fundraising event she never expected to happen. For years she had fought financial problems almost alone. Donations barely covered expenses. Repairs were delayed. Veterinary bills accumulated faster than she could pay them. Yet the story of Rex's return and the rescued dogs had touched something inside the community. Local businesses donated food. Church groups arrived carrying blankets and supplies. Families who had never visited the shelter before volunteered to help. Children painted signs while retirees organized donation tables. Emily moved through the crowd with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. At 62, she had spent most of her life helping abandoned animals. She was not accustomed to being helped herself. Nearby, Sarah Carter worked behind a folding table covered with registration forms and donation envelopes. Her relationship with her mother remained complicated, but something had shifted during the past week. Sarah was a successful attorney because she believed facts mattered more than feelings. After losing her father to cancer, she had developed a habit of solving problems through logic and control. For years she viewed the shelter as a burden that endangered her mother's future. Now, after examining transport records and witnessing the condition of the rescued dogs, certainty had become harder to maintain. During a quiet moment she opened her laptop and continued tracing corporate registrations linked to the transport company. What she found made her pause. Several supposedly independent businesses shared the same mailing address. Others used identical legal representatives. One company dissolved shortly after another appeared. Ownership shifted repeatedly between limited liability corporations. The pattern resembled something she had encountered before while investigating financial fraud cases. Individually, none of the connections proved wrongdoing. Together, they suggested deliberate concealment. Sarah printed several pages and stared at the names. Again and again, different organizations seemed connected to the same network surrounding Second Chance, Working Dogs Ranch. As evening approached, the fundraiser exceeded every expectation. Donations poured in, local musicians performed, volunteers filled collection boxes faster than anyone could count. For the first time in years, Emily felt genuine hope that the shelter might survive. She looked across the snowy property and saw neighbors helping neighbors, children playing with rescue dogs, and families offering support without being asked. The sight brought tears to her eyes. Hundreds of miles of worry suddenly felt lighter. Meanwhile, Jack and Mike left the ranch carrying more questions than answers. The facility appeared legitimate. The employees seemed sincere. Yet Rex's reaction to the isolated building and the missing records refused to leave Jack's mind. That night, after returning home, he sat beside the fireplace reviewing notes, while Rex slept near the stove. Snow tapped softly against the cabin windows. The quiet should have been comforting. Instead, it felt temporary. His phone rang shortly before midnight. The number was unfamiliar. Jack answered cautiously. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then an older male voice emerged from the silence. The man sounded nervous, exhausted, and frightened. "You're asking questions about Second Chance," he said. Jack immediately sat upright. "Who is this?" The caller hesitated. "Someone who used to work for them." Jack glanced toward Rex. The dog had already lifted his head. "What kind of work?" "Transport routes." Another pause followed. "I drove animals across 4 states. Jack's pulse quickened. "And?" The man exhaled slowly. "And I kept records." Jack felt every muscle in his body tighten. "What records?" The voice lowered almost to a whisper. "The kind they don't want anyone finding." Snow continued falling outside, as the cabin suddenly felt colder than before. The caller remained silent for several seconds before speaking again. "I have proof of things that happened at that ranch. Things nobody would believe." Then the line went dead, leaving Jack staring at the phone while Rex watched him from across the room. Both of them knowing that the mystery surrounding Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch had just become something far more dangerous. A heavy blanket of snow covered Silver Creek as another Montana winter storm moved slowly across the valley, turning the world beyond the shelter fences into a landscape of white silence and shadow. Inside his lakeside cabin, Jack Turner sat beside the fireplace long after the mysterious phone call had ended, staring at the dark screen of his phone while Rex rested nearby. The German Shepherd had not gone back to sleep. Instead, he remained alert, watching Jack with the same quiet focus that had once kept them alive during dangerous missions overseas. Jack could not explain it, but he felt that whatever happened next would change everything. The following afternoon, another call arrived. This time, the man agreed to meet. The location was a small diner nearly 30 miles outside Silver Creek, a place mostly visited by truck drivers and ranch workers. When Jack arrived, Sheriff Mike Reynolds was already waiting inside. The old diner smelled of coffee, grilled onions, and wood smoke. Only a few customers occupied the booths. Near the back window sat an older man wearing a faded brown jacket and a gray baseball cap. He looked tired, not physically tired, but burdened. His shoulders sagged beneath years of regret. When Jack approached, the man stood slowly. "Tom Walker," he said. His handshake was rough and hesitant. Tom appeared to be in his early 60s. Deep lines marked his face. Years on the road had weathered him. His eyes constantly scanned the room as though expecting someone to appear. Mike introduced himself and sat beside Jack. Tom remained silent for several moments before finally speaking. "I almost didn't come." "Why?" Jack asked. Tom looked down at his coffee. "Because I've spent 3 years trying to forget what I saw." Silence settled over the booth. Outside, snow drifted past the windows. Finally, Tom reached into a worn leather satchel and removed a thick envelope. "I drove transport routes for several companies connected to Second Chance," he said. "At first I believed everything they told me. Rescue dogs, rehabilitation programs, working dog placements." He laughed bitterly. "I wanted to believe it." Jack listened carefully. Tom's voice carried the weight of someone confessing a long-hidden secret. "What changed?" Mike asked. Tom rubbed his hands together. "One transport route." His gaze drifted toward the window. "I delivered 6 dogs to a private security contractor in Nevada. I thought they were trained working dogs being reassigned. Later I learned none of them had owners. They were rescue animals." Jack frowned. "Sold." Tom nodded. "Sold." The word hung heavily between them. Tom explained that over time he discovered a pattern. Rescue dogs arrived at various facilities under different names. Their records changed repeatedly. Some were transferred to legitimate homes and programs. Others disappeared into a system hidden behind layers of paperwork. Certain dogs ended up with private security companies. Others were sold to remote training facilities. Many simply vanished from official records. "They treated them like inventory," Tom said quietly. "Not animals, not living creatures, inventory." Jack looked toward Rex. The German Shepherd lay beneath the table, calm but watchful. The thought of Rex being passed from place to place as property made his stomach tighten. "Who was behind it?" Mike asked. Tom shook his head. "I never met the top people. Everything was compartmentalized. Different companies, different paperwork, different names." He slid several photographs across the table. Some showed transport trucks. Others showed kennel facilities. One photograph depicted rows of cages inside a warehouse. Like building, the dogs inside appeared frightened and thin. Jack stared at the image. The conditions looked painfully. Tom pointed to another picture. This was taken during a transfer stop in Wyoming. Mike examined it carefully. "When? 2 years ago. And nobody reported this?" Tom laughed again, though there was no humor in it. Most people only saw what they wanted to see. For the next hour, Tom shared everything he knew. Dates, locations, company names, route schedules. Several details matched information Sarah had already uncovered. The connections between transport companies suddenly made more sense. They were not isolated businesses, they were pieces of a larger network. Meanwhile, back at the shelter, Sarah Carter sat with her mother in the small office overlooking the kennels. The fundraiser had brought hope back to the rescue center, but it had also changed something inside Sarah. For the first time in years, she was seeing her mother's world through different eyes. Emily sat reviewing medical reports while answering volunteer questions and coordinating donations. She moved constantly, solving problems, helping animals, encouraging people. Sarah watched quietly. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked suddenly. Emily looked up. "The shelter, all of it." Emily smiled faintly. 22 years. Sarah leaned back in her chair. 22 years. Longer than many careers. Longer than some marriages. She remembered childhood birthdays spent helping at adoption events, weekend trips canceled because injured animals needed care, countless late-night phone calls about rescues. For years she had viewed the shelter as the thing stealing her mother's time. Now she wondered if it had been the thing giving her mother's life meaning. "You gave up a lot," Sarah said softly. Emily looked surprised. "I chose it." Sarah felt an unfamiliar guilt. She had spent years trying to pull Emily away from the shelter without truly understanding why she stayed. "Dad would have been proud of you," she said. For a moment neither spoke. Then Emily reached across the desk and squeezed her daughter's hand. It was a small gesture, but it carried years of unspoken understanding. Later that evening, Jack returned from meeting Tom. Snow covered the shelter grounds. Lights glowed warmly from the kennels. Dogs barked in the distance. Rex greeted him at the truck before he could even close the door. Somehow the German shepherd seemed to sense the importance of what had happened. Jack walked into the office where Emily, Sarah, and Mike waited. Tom followed behind carrying his satchel. The older man looked nervous. He had spent years running from these memories. Now he was finally sharing them. "There's one more thing," Tom said. He opened the satchel and removed a weathered photograph. The edges were bent. The colors had faded. Tom placed it carefully on the table. Everyone leaned closer. The image showed part of Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch. A kennel yard stood in the background. Several dogs were visible near a fence. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then Jack froze. His breathing stopped. There, standing beside the fence, was a German shepherd older. Thin, scarred, but unmistakable Rex. The photograph had been dated just 12 months earlier. Jack stared at the image in silence. 6 years after disappearing, 1 year before returning home, Rex had been there. Not lost, not dead. Waiting somewhere inside the shadows of Second Chance, Working Dogs Ranch. A pale winter sun hung low above Silver Creek, casting long shadows across the snow-covered rescue center while a cold breeze drifted through the pine trees surrounding the property. The discovery of the photograph had changed everything. For days, Jack Turner found himself staring at the image Tom Walker had given him. Every time he looked at it, he saw the same thing. Rex standing near the fence at Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch, only a year earlier. 6 years of mystery had suddenly become 1 year of missing answers. That realization haunted him. Inside the shelter office, Tom sat quietly with a mug of coffee between his hands. He looked more relaxed than when he first arrived, but guilt still lingered in his eyes. Some secrets stayed heavy no matter how long they were carried. Jack placed the photograph on the desk. "Tell me everything you remember about him." Tom nodded slowly. "Rex wasn't like the others." Jack remained silent. "Most dogs learn to keep their heads down," Tom continued. "It was the only way to avoid trouble." Emily and Sarah listened from across the room. Tom stared at the photograph for several seconds before speaking again. "Could barely walk. Some workers got frustrated because he moved too slowly. One day I saw a handler dragging him by a leash. Tom paused. Rex stepped between them. Jack felt his chest tighten. The story sounded familiar. Not because he had heard it before, but because it sounded exactly like the dog he remembered. Tom continued. He didn't attack, didn't growl. He just stood there. The handler couldn't move Bruno without moving Rex first. Emily smiled sadly. That sounds like him. Tom nodded. That happened more than once. As the morning passed, more stories emerged. An elderly beagle named Harvey had once been cornered by younger dogs during feeding time. Rex stood beside him until Harvey finished eating. A nervous Australian shepherd named Lucy refused to leave her kennel for days after arriving. Rex slept outside her crate every night, until she finally came out on her own. A blind Labrador named Duke often became disoriented in the exercise yard. Somehow Rex always seemed to guide him back. None of it surprised Jack. Years earlier, during military deployments, Rex had displayed the same instinct. Strength meant protection. It always had. Tom shook his head. The people running things didn't like it. Sarah frowned. Why? Because Rex ignored the system. Tom gave a humorless laugh. They wanted obedience, predictability, dogs that followed commands without question. And Rex kept interfering. Jack already knew where the story was going. They called him difficult. Tom nodded. Difficult, unmanageable, too independent. Emily crossed her arms. For protecting other dogs, for thinking for himself. Silence settled over the room. Jack looked down at the photograph again. Somewhere during those missing years, people had tried to reduce Rex to inventory. Yet the dog had remained exactly who he was. The realization filled him with both pride and sadness. Later that afternoon, Jack walked through the shelter grounds. Snow crunched beneath his boots while Rex moved beside him. The German shepherd had regained much of his strength. His coat looked healthier. His eyes seemed brighter. Yet Jack sometimes caught glimpses of old pain hidden behind them. Trauma did not disappear simply because someone was finally safe. Near the medical building, Molly rested beneath a blanket while several younger dogs gathered nearby. The elderly golden retriever had changed dramatically during the past few weeks. Proper treatment, warm shelter, and regular meals had restored some of the life that hardship had nearly stolen. Her injured leg was healing slowly. More importantly, her spirit was returning. Molly had become something unexpected at the rescue center. Whenever frightened animals arrived, she somehow found them. A young mixed-breed puppy named Daisy, rescued from a roadside ditch, refused to stop crying during her first night. Molly slept beside her kennel. A shy cocker spaniel named Oliver spent 2 days hiding from everyone after arriving from another shelter. Molly sat quietly nearby until he approached on his own. Even Benny, the nervous one-eyed terrier who trusted almost nobody, allowed Molly to sit beside him. Emily often joked that Molly had become the shelter's grandmother, watching her move among the animals. Sarah finally understood why her mother had dedicated so much of her life to this place. It wasn't only about rescue, it was about healing. Emily joined her daughter near the fence. For several moments neither spoke. Then Sarah quietly said, "I used to think you were sacrificing too much." Emily looked toward the kennels. "Maybe I was." Sarah shook her head. "No, I don't think so anymore." The older woman smiled softly. Some wounds healed through words. Others healed through understanding. As evening approached, Tom prepared to leave. Before going, he handed Jack a small notebook. "What's this?" Jack asked. "Things I wrote down." Tom looked uncomfortable. Names, dates, deliveries, places that felt wrong. Jack opened the notebook. Pages were filled with handwritten notes. Some entries referred to dogs. Others mentioned transfer locations. One address appeared several times. Jack recognized it immediately. Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch. "There's something else," Tom said. "I never had proof." Mike Reynolds, who had just arrived at the shelter, raised an eyebrow. "What kind of records?" The real records. Tom pointed toward the notebook. Not the paperwork inspectors saw. Darkness had already begun settling over Silver Creek when Jack returned to his cabin. Snowflakes drifted through the air beneath the glow of distant street lights. Inside, the fire crackled softly while Rex rested near the door. Jack spent hours reviewing Tom's notes. Most entries raised questions rather than answering them. Then he noticed something unusual. Several deliveries referenced an old storage building at the ranch. The same building that had disturbed Rex during their visit. Jack looked up. Rex. The German shepherd immediately lifted his head. Jack held up the notebook. Is that where it is? Rex stood. His ears moved forward. Slowly, Jack grabbed his coat and truck keys. A short time later, they arrived near the edge of the ranch property. Snow covered the ground beneath a moonlit sky. Jack had no intention of entering the ranch illegally. He only wanted a closer look. Yet before he could decide what to do, Rex began moving. Purposefully, the German shepherd followed a narrow path behind several older buildings. Jack hurried after him. Rex stopped near a weathered structure partially hidden behind storage containers and overgrown fencing. Unlike the rest of the ranch, this building appeared forgotten. The dog stood motionless beside a side entrance. Then he looked directly at Jack. For several seconds neither moved. Finally, Jack noticed something protruding from beneath a broken wooden panel near the wall. A metal filing drawer. His pulse quickened. Rex stepped aside and sat quietly. Jack stared at the hidden compartment. Whatever secrets had been buried at Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch, Rex had just led him directly to them. A bitter wind rolled down from the mountains and swept across Silver Creek as winter tightened its grip on the valley, covering roads, rooftops, and frozen fields beneath a fresh layer of snow. Inside the sheriff's office, however, the atmosphere felt far warmer than the weather outside because, for the first time since Rex had returned, Jack Turner could feel the investigation moving forward. The hidden records recovered near Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch had changed everything. What had once been suspicion was becoming evidence. Sheriff Mike Reynolds sat at a conference table surrounded by stacks of files, while two investigators from the Montana Department of Animal Welfare reviewed transport logs and financial records. One of them, Special Investigator Laura Bennett, was a determined woman in her 40s known for exposing illegal animal trafficking operations across several western states. Years earlier, she had helped dismantle a large dogfighting network, an experience that left her with little patience for people who profited from animal suffering. The second investigator, David Morales, was a former federal accountant whose specialty involved tracing hidden financial transactions. David rarely spoke unless necessary, but when he did, people listened. Together, they spent hours analyzing the documents Tom Walker had helped uncover. Every page revealed another piece of the same disturbing picture. Dogs were transferred under false names. Ownership records disappeared. Rescue animals moved between multiple shell companies before being sold. The deeper they looked, the larger the operation appeared. Jack sat quietly while they worked. Rex lay beside his chair. The German shepherd seemed calmer these days. Yet every so often his eyes drifted toward the folders spread across the table as if he somehow understood they contained fragments of his missing years. Laura placed several photographs side by side. We've identified at least 27 dogs whose records vanished after entering the Second Chance system. Mike frowned. Only 27? Laura looked up. 27 we can prove. There may be many more. David slid another document across the table. And we finally know who benefited. The name at the top of the page immediately caught everyone's attention. Richard Coleman. Jack had seen the name before. It appeared on property records linked to Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch. Publicly, Coleman was viewed as a successful businessman and philanthropist. He donated to animal charities, sponsored rescue events, appeared in local newspapers smiling beside adopted dogs. Yet behind the carefully maintained image stood a very different story. David tapped a series of financial statements. Over $6 million moved through companies connected to him during the past 5 years. Mike shook his head. From dogs? From transactions involving dogs? David corrected him. Private security contracts, specialized training facilities, protection companies, some legitimate, some questionable. Laura crossed her arms. The rescue operation wasn't always a rescue operation. Silence filled the room. Jack looked at Rex. The dog had survived inside that system for years. The thought made his stomach tighten. While the investigation expanded, life at the shelter continued changing in unexpected ways. News of the rescued dogs and the ongoing investigation had spread far beyond Silver Creek. Donations arrived almost daily. Some came from neighboring towns. Others arrived through online campaigns, started by people who had never even visited Montana. Emily Carter stood in the shelter office reviewing financial reports with visible disbelief. For years she had fought bankruptcy. Now the numbers in front of her told a completely different story. The shelter's debts were gone. Repairs could finally be completed. Medical supplies could be purchased without fear. Volunteer coordinator Lisa Hernandez entered carrying a stack of envelopes. More donations. Emily laughed softly. I never thought I'd be overwhelmed by good news. Outside, dogs played in fresh snow, while families visited adoption events. Molly, whose recovery continued steadily, had become something of a local celebrity. The elderly golden retriever greeted newcomers with patient kindness, often calming nervous animals within minutes of their arrival. Watching Molly move among the kennels reminded Emily why she had never given up. Not because rescue work was easy, because every life mattered. Nearby, Sarah Carter stood beside a pickup truck unloading donated blankets. Several weeks earlier, she would have been back in Denver handling contracts and corporate meetings. Now she found herself checking adoption paperwork and helping organize shelter operations. The change surprised even her. That evening she joined Emily on the porch overlooking the property. Snowflakes drifted through the fading light. Dogs barked happily in the distance. For several moments neither woman spoke. Then Sarah broke the silence. I made a decision. Emily looked at her. What kind of decision? Sarah smiled faintly. I'm moving back. Emily blinked. Back to Silver Creek? Sarah nodded. There's a law office downtown looking for a partner. The older woman stared at her daughter. You're serious? I am. Sarah looked toward the shelter. I spent years trying to convince you to leave this place. Her voice softened. Maybe I should have spent more time understanding it. Emily felt tears threaten to form. She quickly looked away before Sarah noticed. Some victories arrived quietly. This was one of them. Days later, the investigation reached a turning point. Evidence from multiple states had been collected. Financial records connected the companies. Witness statements supported the documents. Federal agencies became involved. Animal welfare investigators coordinated with law enforcement across state lines. Richard Coleman suddenly found himself at the center of a rapidly growing case. Yet despite everything they had uncovered, one obstacle remained. They still needed authorization to search the ranch itself. The request moved through legal channels faster than anyone expected. By now, the evidence was simply too substantial to ignore. Late one evening, Jack sat in the sheriff's office with Mike, Laura, David, Sarah, Emily, and Tom Walker. The room felt tense. Everyone understood the significance of what was happening. Outside, darkness covered Silver Creek. Inside, nobody spoke much. They waited. Finally, the office door opened. A county judge's courier stepped inside carrying a sealed envelope. Mike accepted it and carefully opened the package. The room became completely silent. He read the document once. Then again, a slow smile appeared on his face. Jack immediately knew. Mike looked around the room before placing the signed papers on the table. We got it. Emily released a breath. She didn't realize she had been holding. Sarah smiled. Tom lowered his head in relief. Laura nodded with satisfaction. Jack reached down and rested a hand on Rex's shoulder. The German shepherd looked up at him calmly. For the first time since returning home, it felt as though justice might finally be within reach. On the table between them lay the document that would change everything. A signed search warrant authorizing a full investigation of Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch. A pale dawn spread across the snow-covered fields surrounding Second Chance Working Dogs Ranch as dozens of vehicles gathered quietly along the access road, their headlights cutting through the winter darkness like distant stars. The operation had been months in the making, but for Jack Turner it felt as though everything had begun 6 years earlier on a dusty road in Afghanistan. He stood beside Sheriff Mike Reynolds while federal investigators, animal welfare officers, and local deputies prepared to execute the search warrant. Rex sat calmly at his side. The German shepherd's ears were alert, his eyes fixed on the ranch beyond the gates. For a moment Jack placed a hand on the dog's shoulder and felt a strange mixture of pride, anger, and gratitude. Without Rex, none of them would be standing there. As the convoy moved forward, the gates opened under official orders, and investigators entered the property. At first, everything looked exactly as it had during Jack's earlier visit. The training fields appeared clean. The public kennels appeared organized. Volunteers seemed confused rather than hostile. Yet, as investigators began examining restricted areas and opening secured buildings, a different reality emerged. Hidden records matched Tom Walker's testimony. Transport logs revealed animals moved through a network of shell companies. Unregistered holding areas contained dogs whose identities had been altered repeatedly. Some animals carried microchips linked to owners who had reported them missing years earlier. Others possessed medical records that had vanished from official databases. Laura Bennett coordinated teams moving from building to building while David Morales documented financial evidence connecting the operation to companies across several states. The deeper investigators searched, the more the carefully crafted image of the ranch collapsed. Inside one warehouse, officers discovered rows of kennels hidden behind false storage walls. Many of the dogs were frightened, but otherwise healthy. Others showed signs of neglect and prolonged confinement. Some had spent so much time being transferred between facilities that they no longer responded to the names written on their paperwork. Emily Carter arrived later that morning with several shelter volunteers prepared to assist with emergency animal care. Her heart broke each time another kennel door opened. Yet among the sadness came moments of hope. A small terrier named Winston was identified through an old microchip and reunited by phone with a retired schoolteacher in Idaho who had searched for him for nearly 3 years. A black Labrador named Sadie belonged to a family in Wyoming that had never stopped posting missing dog notices online. A pair of elderly border collies were traced to a rancher who believed they had died during a wildfire evacuation. One reunion after another began unfolding as investigators contacted owners and rescue organizations. Tears flowed freely throughout the day. Some people drove hundreds of miles after receiving unexpected calls, telling them their missing companions had been found alive. Watching those reunions reminded Jack that the investigation had never been only about exposing corruption. It was about restoring lives. Meanwhile, Richard Coleman attempted to maintain control of the situation. The ranch owner arrived surrounded by attorneys and insisted the operation was a misunderstanding. Publicly, he had spent years presenting himself as a champion of animal welfare. He remained calm while cameras recorded every moment. Yet that confidence began to fade as investigators uncovered additional evidence. Financial records connected him directly to illegal transfers. Witness statements placed him at the center of key decisions. Internal communications revealed deliberate efforts to conceal ownership histories and manipulate identification records. By mid-afternoon, federal agents informed him he was under arrest pending multiple charges related to fraud, illegal animal trafficking, and record falsification. For the first time since Jack had met him, Richard Coleman looked genuinely afraid. As officers escorted him toward a waiting vehicle, Rex watched quietly from across the yard. The German Shepherd showed no aggression, no triumph, only calm observation. The battle that had consumed so many years was ending. Later that evening, Silver Creek held an emergency community gathering inside the town hall. The room filled quickly with residents, volunteers, reporters, and families whose lives had been touched by the investigation. Emily spoke briefly about the rescued animals. Mike Reynolds thanked the agencies involved. Laura Bennett provided updates regarding ongoing efforts to reunite animals with former owners. Then something unexpected happened. Several people asked Jack to speak. For years he would have refused immediately. He avoided attention whenever possible. Talking about Afghanistan remained painful. Talking about Rex had always felt impossible. Yet as he looked around the room, he realized something had changed. The fear that once controlled him no longer felt as powerful. Slowly, he stepped toward the podium. The room fell silent. Jack looked down at Rex lying beside the stage. Then he began telling the story. He spoke about a young military working dog assigned to him years ago. He spoke about patrols through dangerous territory and long nights depending on each other for survival. He spoke about the explosion that separated them. About signing paperwork that declared Rex dead. About spending 6 years carrying guilt and unanswered questions. Several times his voice nearly broke, yet he continued. For the first time, he allowed strangers to see the grief he had hidden for so long. He admitted that losing Rex had felt like losing a member of his family. He admitted that part of him had never forgiven himself. When he finished, the room remained silent for several seconds before applause slowly spread throughout the crowd. Not because he was a hero, not because Rex was extraordinary, but because everyone understood what it meant to lose someone and what it meant to find hope again. Later, after most people had gone home, Jack stood outside the town hall beneath a sky filled with stars. Snow sparkled across the streets of Silver Creek. Rex rested quietly beside him while volunteers loaded supplies into trucks. Emily approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Jack before looking toward the shelter in the distance. "You know," she said softly, "this place is changing." Jack nodded. "Looks that way." Emily smiled. "I don't just mean the shelter." For a moment she watched Rex. There are more retired working dogs out there than most people realize. Military dogs, police dogs, search and rescue dogs. Some end up forgotten when their service ends. Jack understood exactly what she meant. Emily turned toward him. "I've been thinking about something." He raised an eyebrow. "That usually means trouble." She laughed. "Maybe." Then her expression became serious. "I want to build something permanent. A sanctuary. A place where working dogs can retire with dignity." Jack looked at Rex. The German Shepherd calmly returned his gaze. Emily continued, "I can't do it alone." The cold night seemed suddenly quieter. "What are you asking?" Emily smiled. "I'm asking if you'll help me build it." Jack looked toward the stars, then toward the shelter lights glowing warmly in the distance. For the first time in many years, the future no longer felt empty. It felt possible. A gentle autumn breeze drifted across Silver Creek 1 year later, carrying the scent of pine trees, fallen leaves, and fresh water from the lake that shimmered beneath the golden afternoon sun. The harsh winter storms that had once dominated the valley felt like distant memories now. Along the eastern shoreline stood a place that had not existed 12 months earlier. A wooden sign welcomed visitors arriving through a long tree-lined entrance road. The words carved into the sign reflected sunlight as families, volunteers, and visitors gathered beneath colorful banners fluttering in the wind. Guardian Pines Sanctuary. What had begun as a simple conversation between Emily Carter and Jack Turner, outside the town hall, had grown into something far larger than either of them imagined. The sanctuary stretched across dozens of acres overlooking the lake, providing a permanent home for retired military dogs, former police K-9's aging search, and rescue animals, and rescue dogs that nobody else wanted. Wide open fields replaced cramped kennels. Walking trails wound through pine forests. Heated cabins provided comfort during winter. Veterinary facilities offered long-term care. Every detail reflected one simple belief: service animals deserved dignity after a lifetime spent helping others. People arrived from neighboring towns, nearby states, and even across the country to see the sanctuary. Many brought stories of dogs who had worked faithfully for years before being forgotten. Others came simply to volunteer. Guardian Pines quickly became something more than a shelter. It became a symbol of second chances. At the center of everything stood Rex, the German shepherd who had once been declared dead had become the unofficial ambassador of the sanctuary. Visitors recognized him immediately. Children often stopped to pet him. Veterans traveled hundreds of miles just to meet him. Journalists wrote articles about his remarkable journey. Yet Rex seemed completely unaware of his reputation. He spent most of his days doing what he had always done, watching over others. Whenever a frightened dog arrived, Rex greeted them calmly. Whenever an elderly animal struggled to adjust, Rex remained nearby. Even the newest volunteers learned quickly that if Rex paid attention to a particular dog, that dog usually needed extra care. Jack often joked that Rex had promoted himself to supervisor. Watching the German shepherd move through the sanctuary filled him with a quiet happiness he had not experienced in years. For so long, he had measured life by what he had lost. Now, he measured it by what remained. Nearby, Molly trotted slowly along a walking path surrounded by younger dogs. The elderly golden retriever had become one of the sanctuary's most beloved residents. Her injured leg would never fully recover, and age had added more gray fur to her face. But she moved with surprising confidence. New arrivals often followed her around the property. Volunteers joked that Molly had become the sanctuary's grandmother. She seemed to possess a gift for calming anxious animals. One of her closest companions was a retired police bloodhound named Murphy, a gentle 10-year-old dog who had spent years helping search teams locate missing people. Murphy's handler passed away shortly before retirement, leaving him without a home. Guardian Pines changed that. Like so many others, he found a family there. Inside the main veterinary building, Amanda Brooks reviewed medical charts while preparing for another busy day. Amanda had become an essential part of the sanctuary's success. Her dedication, patience, and compassion earned the trust of every animal she treated. Yet the greatest change in her life had nothing to do with veterinary medicine. Across the room, Sarah Carter entered carrying a stack of paperwork, and immediately smiled when she saw Amanda. The relationship that began during the investigation had quietly grown into something stronger. Shared long hours, common goals, and mutual respect slowly developed into love. 6 months earlier, they had married during a small ceremony beside the lake. Emily cried through nearly the entire event. Sarah later claimed her mother cried more than she did. Nobody believed otherwise. Sarah's decision to move back to Silver Creek proved life-changing. She established a small legal practice that helped local businesses, families, and nonprofit organizations. More importantly, she rebuilt a relationship with her mother that had once seemed impossible to repair. Years of misunderstandings gradually gave way to understanding. The shelter that Sarah once viewed as a burden had become part of her life as well. Emily watched these changes with quiet gratitude. At 63 years old, she finally felt something she had not experienced for a very long time: peace. For years she fought financial struggles, loneliness, and uncertainty. Now she spent her days walking through the sanctuary surrounded by animals, volunteers, and friends. The community she had spent decades helping had ultimately helped her in return. Silver Creek itself seemed transformed. The sanctuary brought people together in ways nobody expected. Retirees volunteered alongside teenagers. Veterans mentored younger residents. Families adopted animals. Local businesses sponsored events. The town had become a larger family connected by a shared purpose. Even Sheriff Mike Reynolds occasionally spent afternoons helping maintain trails, though he insisted nobody mention it publicly. Tom Walker visited several times each year. The former transport driver never completely forgave himself for the years he spent looking away from what was happening, but he found comfort knowing his testimony helped save countless animals. Laura Bennett and David Morales continued working on national investigations involving animal trafficking networks. Though both remained frequent supporters of the sanctuary, their work had helped ensure Richard Coleman and several associates faced justice. Yet nobody at Guardian Pines spent much time discussing Richard anymore. The focus remained on healing rather than revenge. As evening approached, a community celebration marked the first anniversary of the sanctuary's opening. Music drifted through the air. Volunteers prepared food. Children played with dogs across the open fields. Laughter echoed beneath the autumn sky. When the event finally began winding down, Jack quietly slipped away toward the lake. He followed a wooden path leading to a small dock extending over the water. The setting sun painted the surface of Silver Creek in shades of gold and orange. Rex followed him as he always did. Molly arrived a few moments later and settled comfortably nearby. Jack sat at the end of the dock and watched the reflections dance across the lake. For several minutes he simply listened. The distant laughter of volunteers, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the gentle movement of water against the wooden posts. Life. Real life. The kind he once believed had ended years ago. Beside him sat a small metal water bowl, the same bowl that had remained untouched in his cabin for 6 long years after Rex disappeared. For years it represented loss, grief, questions without answers. Tonight, it held fresh water reflecting the colors of the sunset. Jack looked at Rex resting beside his feet. The German shepherd appeared older now. A few gray hairs surrounded his muzzle. Scars remained visible beneath his coat, yet his eyes looked peaceful. Jack smiled softly. Finally, he understood something that had taken years to learn. Rex had not returned simply to be found. He had returned to lead him somewhere toward healing, toward friendship, toward purpose, toward family. The miracle had never been that Rex survived. The miracle was everything that happened after he came home. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the mountains, Jack sat beside his oldest friend while laughter drifted across Guardian Pines sanctuary. And for the first time in a very long time, the empty places inside his heart no longer felt empty at all. Sometimes miracles do not arrive as flashes of light or voices from heaven. Sometimes they arrive on 4 tired legs carrying scars from battles nobody else can see. Rex's story reminds us that God often works through the most unexpected messengers. When the world believed a loyal dog was gone forever, God was still writing a different ending. When Jack believed he had lost both his partner and his purpose, God was quietly guiding him toward a future greater than he could imagine. And when abandoned animals had no voice and no hope, God placed people in their path who were willing to care, protect, and fight for them. The greatest miracle in this story was not simply that Rex came home. The greatest miracle was how one act of faith, one loyal heart, and one second chance transformed an entire community. In our own lives, we all face seasons when we feel lost, forgotten, or broken. We pray for answers and wonder if anyone is listening. But this story reminds us that God is always working, even when we cannot see it. Sometimes He is preparing a blessing. Sometimes He is opening a door. Sometimes He is leading us toward people and purposes we never expected. So never lose hope. Never stop believing that. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need a little hope in their life. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from, and what part of Rex's journey inspired you the most. If you believe in second chances, loyalty, and the quiet miracles that God places in our lives, please subscribe to the channel and join our growing family. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, strengthen your heart during difficult days, and fill your home with peace, hope, and love. And may you always remember that sometimes the miracle you are waiting for is already on its way.